So we are going to make something from start to finish so you can see my process and how I start to do things. So in this case, we're going to start with the drums like I normally like to. So here I start with a loop. It's from the Count pack. I like to start with a lot of percussion loops if I feel like I just want some immediate inspiration. So this is what it sounds like. So I think there's a lot that we can work with, but I want to chop it up a bit more in order to get some parts that I like. And so an easy way to start this off is to look at if I like where the transients hit with the beat. So in my opinion, they're a little bit too late. So what I can do is just cut what I don't like out and just move it around. So maybe something like that. So now it sounds like this. And so I like that. I can pick and choose. And so what I did was just shuffle it around, organize it to a way that I like. And so here's what we have. I like to keep it simple. I like to just use 1 or 2 sections of a loop and have them repeating. And so from there, what we can do is actually pitch this down. So I think personally that this could be a little choppier. So what I do is using the beat warping in Ableton, I'll chop it a little bit. And I think I like that, but the pitch is a little high for me, so I'll just pitch them down. And so I like that. It's kind of in the mid frequency range. That leaves a lot for your high end. And so with that percussion, we can move on to our kicks. And so I just have a kick here. What I can do with this is just set it as a bass 4 on the floor. Personally, I've been doing a lot of 4 on the floor type stuff, so I want to change it up a little bit and mess with the kicks. So an easy way to do that is just cut out sections you may or may not like. So personally, I like this. It's very simple, but I want to add some accents. And so what you can do is use the kick itself at a different volume. And so what you can do with that is just leave open the first beat on the next bar. So you can kind of just mess with the kick rhythm before it. Right, and so now we can just work with that and, you know, right, so let's just hear what we have all together. So now moving on, we can start to add the clap. So for me, the clap defines a lot of the beat before you even get onto the melodics. I personally want to use a snare this time, maybe layer it with a clap. And so this is what we have. It has a good tone, but I want to reduce the tail a little bit. And you can do this manually using faders, or if you're in the drum rack, you can use their controls there. And so now we have a solid groove. What we can do is add some hi-hats because I want to keep the percussion more in the high end. And something like this, I just want to keep it simple. And so again, I feel like the tail's a little long with the hi-hat, especially for the vibe I'm going for. You can also see that when I chop this, I left a little bit of space for some delay. And so with the snares a little early, this is what our drum sounds like. And so changing the hi-hat percussion a little bit to add more variety, this is what we have. Cool, so personally, I'm pretty satisfied with the drum so far. In order to now get an idea of the melodics, it depends on how I'm feeling, if I want to just start purely by laying down chords or something. But today I want to work with a sample and build off of that. I personally don't play guitar, so I used a guitar sample in order to add that variety that I may not necessarily be able to insert myself. So this is our sample. And what you can do with this now is start to play around with it. What I add here is some RC20. Personally, it just gives me a different feel that I like. It gets rid of some harsher tones. So it's a good sample, but I feel like I want to change it up a bit. When you change the pitch of a sample in Ableton or in other plugins, the algorithm that it uses, I personally like how it sounds when it's pitched down rather than up. And so now we can chop the sample to add more variety. When sample chopping, it's a balance between trying out things versus having a vision of what you want it to sound like and then going after it. A lot of times that random chopping can come up with great ideas. However, I feel like that only helps after a lot of time chopping samples, so you know where something would sound good. And just a very simple chop here I made just to make it sound a little better. And now working with this, I can begin to add some effects. So personally, I feel like some of the notes here and there start to clash with the other elements. So what I'll do is I kind of misuse the multiband dynamic compressor and just use it to take out some mids. It's just an easy way to do it. And so now it just kind of sits in its place a little bit better, but the chops are still a little too rough for me. So I'm going to add a reverb. So now I'm going to sidechain it. In a lot of cases, you just sidechain it to your kick, but the effect I want to go for is every beat, even though there's not a kick there. And so what I'll do is use a sidechain plugin that I like, and I'll put this after all of the effects because I want my reverb and everything to be sidechained as well. If I just have it end as one bar. So I can set it to every quarter, and I think that's good for a good base idea and working out from there. And so what I can now start to do is begin to balance the elements using the mix. So personally, I feel like the hi-hat is has a little bit too much high end compared to the rest of the track, as well as the clap being a tiny bit too loud. And so now I can begin to take out certain frequencies that I don't like from other elements. So that means cutting out the low of the guitar because I know I'm going to fill it with other things, and the low mid of the original percussion loop. And I like to have a lot of stereo imaging on a lot of my percussion. And so what I'll use here is a delay from Ableton. And so what it's doing here is actually we're separating the left and the right channels from each other. And so what will happen is that the right channel will fire at a different time than the left, and what we'll do is make that fire around 5 to 15 milliseconds difference depending on how wide you want it to be, and that'll create an effect of it being in a stereo image. I then reduce the gain a little bit, so when something's stereo it seems to stand out more. It's not necessarily louder, but it appears to be louder. And so what I also do is bring the balance back because if I'm delaying it on the right, it'll appear to be slightly on the left. And so I want to center it again just in stereo. And so this is what the percussion sounds like after that. And without it. All right, so that sounds pretty good. There's a few edits that we could make, maybe to define the genre a little bit. So a lot of the time I stay out of defining genres, but genres are a great way to have a solid inspiration for where your track can go. So I like this idea so far. It just feels a little rigid to me. So the first thing I'm going to do is offset the clap a little bit. So what we can do now is just, I really like the double kick, and so I kind of want to mess with that more. So what I'm going to do is just keep adding them. So that sounds pretty good. I'm just going to adjust the volume of the clap a little bit. So I like to mix as I go. I think that's an important way of keeping on top of stuff to make sure that you have less hard work to do at the very end of it. And so since our percussion is starting to be a little more defined, we can start adding accented notes or hits or one shots or anything we want. And so a great way to do that is maybe choose something a little random. Although this can seem a little forced, sometimes if you try something and make it work, it'll come up with a unique sound that maybe you wouldn't have thought of in the first place. So here I have this one shot tom. And so I like the tone of this, especially in the song. So I think that could fit. What I like to do just to get a clear idea of it first is maybe mix it. And so what I'm going to do here is just that little trick of using a multiband compressor, getting rid of the mids a little bit. And then in Multiband Dynamics and Ableton, they also have OTT. And so this is just over the top multiband compression. And it really brings out a lot of the highs and squashes the hell out of a lot of sounds. So here's what it sounds like. So it's obviously too much, so I can just bring that back a little bit. And so that's just brought out a lot of the highs. And what else we can do is maybe EQ out some of the lows, because this is meant to be melodic, and even though it's initially sort of a melodic percussion instrument, we don't want anything clashing. And also what we can do is add Valhalla Vintage Verb. So here, this is just the default preset. I just brought down the mix and the decay a little bit. And so that just gives it some more room. So now that we've mixed the sample a little bit and it is tonal, we can start to mess with the melodics of it. And so what you can do is just slap a tuner in there in order to determine what note it is. And so here you can see it's kind of hovering between A and B flat. And so an easy way to really get it on a key is to use this detune function here. So if I just bring it up, so now it's clearly defined as B flat. And so that is in key. If I tuned it down to A, it might not have been in, because a lot of percussion elements have tonality to them, but they're not clearly defined. And so what I can do is bring it up or down, making sure that it's warped. I like Complex or Complex Pro. It just depends. You can just kind of mess around with it. If I bring that down, we can get a little melody. And you can also vary that. So this will be in E flat right now. If it's in key, I can maybe change the tone of this up to F sharp. So this is what we have so far with everything together. And these hi-hats I feel add something, but I feel like I could add more. And so now going back to the percussion, and so here I just have a hi-hat one shot. And so this is just pitched down and made a little choppier. This is what it sounds like originally. I pitched it down and made it a little choppier because I wanted to fit the vibe of the other percussion elements that are generally a little under the high end. And so what I can do with this is just lay out a little pattern. And so this pattern here, you can see that I've brought the volume down quite a bit. It's still the same pitch, and I've also moved it forward from the actual beat, and so it gives it a little swing. And so then you can arrange a pattern. And so here essentially I've just copy pasted this over and over until I found a groove that fit. I'm also going to add a side chain that hits every 1/4, even though that isn't the actual kick drum or the clap even. Sometimes it can be excessive though if everything's ducking different to the kicks. So this is what it sounds like. And you know what? I just want to bring this up in pitch a little bit because it sounds a little trashed. And so you always just want to play around with everything until you feel like it, or you can always go back and change it. And speaking of going back and changing it, I do like this guitar, but something that caught my eye particularly was the chord change in the beginning. So whatever keyboard Rhodes is playing in the background, I quite like that, whereas the loud guitar maybe sometimes gets in the way. So what I can do is actually just mess with that and isolate that. So I'm going to make sure to duplicate this on the side so that I know what my original idea was. And so what I can do is just isolate that part, and since it's changes around there, I just like to do a rough chop and just chop that in there and see how it sounds. And so there was kind of some pickup left over, and I think I could actually work with that. So what I can do is insert some rhythm into this, even though it's very subtle. So here you can do is actually purposefully chopping just below when it hits. This is what it sounds like. So this is what it sounds like all together. And so what I did was, I actually like this guitar bit, so what I did was create a new channel, and this time I added Guitar Rig, and here I just used the auto filter here, which always provides a nice tone, and I pitched it up 12 semitones, so an octave, and this is what it sounds like. And so I've added a little more reverb, as well as increasing the amount of RC20 I used on it. And so this is what it sounds like all together. All right, now we can get on to maybe the bass section. I want to kind of keep this fairly simple and straightforward. So here I always have, I like to use a lot of bass one-shots that I always have on hand. This one is a resampled one by Zicomo. Here I add a lot of effects to my bass just to bring it out. So I have a guitar rig with the mid lead on, and I also have a audio effects rack with a little group setup. And so what that has is, one section is a pure stereo bass, and another section, since they're present as at the same volume, is just the sample with guitar rig on it. And so here I also have a sidechain. While I'm actually making it, I'll just set it to 0, as well as me taking out some mids here. And so here you can begin to start writing a bass line, and so that is generally always a tough part if you want to get something really rhythmic. So what I can do here is actually take some inspiration from the samples. So the chord change here has defined chords, and so you can use the bass note of those chords. And so what I've done here is take this and consolidated it. And what I can do is just drag it into any MIDI channel here, select harmony. So even though these aren't the bass notes, these are the most prominent ones, the ones that I want to use. And so that'll be A sharp and D sharp. And so I can just put that into a channel. And that sounds in key. So it looks like it's more B and D sharp. And so I can just match those rhythms together. And so I feel that this note is quite high, so I can actually bring it lower. Because if I bring this down, it might be a bit low depending. And so with that, you can begin to write out an idea just based on your own feel and touch. Following the initial bass notes of the chords are great, making sure to add accents to them or change the timing if it feels a little off. So I've taken that and just written a little bass line based on the kicks as well as the chords. And so an important part of this is establishing the main rhythm along with the main notes. So here you can see this variation up and down, and then I make some accent changes here. And then I always like to end it with some sort of variation on something different, as well as start the second half with a little change up. And so the best way, in my opinion, to write a bass line is to write it an octave above. So they're very prominent, and you can clearly hear the notes and how they go with the rest of the melody. Even though it sounds horrible, you can just bring it back down, but the most important thing is that they're in key. So this is a very short bass line, so what you can do to increase that space is just add more notes. You don't want to be excessive. So I feel like this fits pretty well, but it's the exact same note. So you can go up or down, but if it's just an accent and you want it to be subtle, going down an octave while not distorting the bass provides some good movement. So this is what it sounds like. And an important part of this also is this softer kick. So if you even insert something that aligns with the softer kick, like it fits because of the transient of the kick. And so now you can continue to do this wherever you would feel like. I would just recommend listening to it, even standing up, walking around and listening to it, and just feeling out where it should go. And so here at the ending, I've sort of switched up the rhythm so it actually falls right after the kick, which provides for some interesting variation. But now what you can do is begin to arrange. And so arranging for me, I always leave to last, or at least until I have a solid main section. So what I can do is just with this, isolate what I feel are the most important elements that I feel like could lead in well. So a good way to do this is something mellow like this guitar, just put it back, and adding more elements that are rhythmic and help to set the tempo for the listener. So you can even bring in elements of percussion. So something like this would be interesting to come in, but you don't want it to be as prominent as it is in the chorus. So what you can do is filter it at a high pass until you're satisfied. And then you can just automate when the effect actually turns on. And so a great way to lead it in is to add some new element. Generally, if you want to isolate a part that you feel will fit in well as a fill, you can see right before the one, there might be a little lead in there, and generally those work pretty well. So here it's very loud and the kick sounds quite different to ours, so we might want to filter that so that it's mainly just the percussion. Maybe a little choppier. And bring the volume down. And maybe get rid of the highs a little bit because it doesn't really fit. And so one more thing, we made this chop more obvious in the chorus, but maybe in the intro we want it to be a little softer, so we can get rid of that. And so this is very in front of the beat, which is great rhythmically, but maybe for our fill we want it to be a little tighter. And here it's just tuning it up, right? So you just listen to it over and over and over again until you hear something that you like or don't like, eventually hate the whole song and never use it for anything. And so what's really important is that you're sort of on a time limit. As soon as you make something you like and you want to listen back and edit it, so the more time you spend listening to it just for the sake of listening to it without trying to think about what you can add, it's going to start to dull in your mind to the point where you've listened to it so many times you don't feel like anything else could go on it. It kind of helps to add some ambience when you want something to sound a little more complex when it's just one element. Some, white noise. And so this is from the Count pack. And there you go. You pretty much have your basic beat just based on a really simple sample and some simple percussion. Just fleshing it out and knowing where to put something comes with time and practice. I personally feel like I'm not there yet, especially because... And so let's just listen to everything we have all together.